I never thought a single text message could make my hands tremble like that. The phone screen glowed in the quiet darkness, the words searing into my mind. You won't believe what happened next. If you want to hear the rest, hit that subscribe button and step into the story with me. The message came from my son, my only child. The same son I had bought a fully paid house for just a few months ago. A house I poured my savings into, lost sleep over, just to help him and his wife start a new chapter. I told myself it was a gift of love, a foundation for their future. And yet now I was no longer family enough for a vacation. I stared at that message. My chest tightened, blood roared in my ears. My icy fingers slowly typed my reply. Okay. Just one word. But inside it lived everything. The pain, the betrayal, the sudden clarity. Even as I pressed send, my mind screamed. So I was good enough to buy you a house, but not good enough to sit at your dinner table? Not good enough to join your damn cruise. My heart thundered like war drums. My breathing turned shallow. But my face remained calm, frozen. Because something in me, the part that always swallowed pride, that always forgave, died in that moment. My phone buzzed again. A second message, this time from Emily, my daughter-in-law. Hope you understand. It's just simpler for everyone this way. Simpler? Yes, of course, Emily. It's always simpler. Once you have the house. Once you've secured your future built on my sacrifice. I set the phone down, my hands still trembling. But I wasn't crying. Not anymore. Because something else had awakened inside me. The part of me that had been too soft, too quiet for far too long. I sat in the same kitchen, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. The morning sun crept across the tiled floor, touching the wooden chairs, the polished counters, the curtains I sewed by hand. All of it for them. For Matthew and Emily. For the family I thought I was building. Now the house felt like a museum of bad decisions. On the walls were smiling photos. Matthew grinning at Disney. Trip paid by me. Cancun when Emily first joined the family. Also me. The Christmas cabin. Fully funded by me once again. And then there was the housewarming last spring. The biggest gift I had ever given anyone. A house, fully paid, no mortgage. Emily had clasped my hands, tears in her eyes. Oh, Olivia, you didn't have to. We're so grateful. You'll always have a room here. Always. And I believed her. Because that's what mothers do, we believe. I remembered staying up late to paint their master bedroom in soft lavender, because Emily said it was calming. I chose every curtain rod, lamp, and throw blanket myself. Ordered and assembled them alone in my garage. At the time it was easier to stay busy. To pretend the growing silence between us was just stress. Just life. Just young people figuring things out. But it wasn't. Now the truth sat heavy on my chest. I had made myself so useful, so convenient, that they stopped seeing me as a person. I was a resource. A wallet. And once the wallet ran dry, they had no use for the woman attached to it. The next morning I couldn't take the silence anymore. I called Martha, my oldest friend. She came within the hour. No questions, no judgment. That's the thing about real friends, they know when words can wait. She stepped into my house, looked at my face and knew. Tell me, she said softly, setting her purse on the table. I slid my phone across the counter. Let her read it. Her jaw clenched, but she stayed quiet at first. Just shook her head slowly, like she'd been expecting it all along. Finally she said, "They've been planning this, Liv." Her words hit me like a stone in the gut. And in that moment I knew. The illusion was gone. I would no longer give endlessly. I would no longer shrink myself to fit their comfort. And I would no longer disappear in the name of love. More than I wanted it to. I kept thinking maybe it was just Emily. That she had somehow gotten into Matthew's head. But Matthew, he wasn't like this. Martha pressed her lips into a thin line. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, steady and firm. Liv, she said gently, you raised a good boy, but you also raised a boy who never had to struggle. Who always had you cleaning up his messes. Emily saw that, and she saw what she could shape him into. Her words stung. Because they were true. I had spent years smoothing every rough patch for Matthew, canceling my own vacations to dog-sit, draining my savings to pay off the last of their student loans, showing up at their house whenever Emily claimed she needed help organizing. Always available, always useful. You need to protect yourself now, Martha said, her voice low, before they take more. I blinked at her, confused. Take more? What more could there be? Martha's eyes sharpened. Have you checked your accounts lately? Do you even know if your name is still on the house title? The investments? Olivia, you're still trusting them. A tight knot began to form in my stomach. My pulse quickened. Oh, I hadn't checked. Why would I? They were family. I let Emily handle most of the online payments, I said, barely above a whisper. She said it was easier. For tax reasons. Martha exhaled sharply and sat back in her chair. Liv, you need to log into everything. Today. And if anything looks off, we go straight to a lawyer. I swallowed hard. My hands began trembling, but not from fear. From realization. From the cold understanding that my trust had been weaponized. I wasn't some fragile old woman. I was just too trusting. And they were counting on that trust to keep me quiet. To keep me compliant. To keep me invisible. But as Martha stared at me waiting for my answer, I felt something inside me shift. A tiny ember, buried beneath years of silence, sparked to life. I sat up straighter. My voice steady for the first time in days. All right. We start today. Martha nodded. Good. Because you're not done yet. And they're not ready for what's coming. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I saw that message again. That stupid, heartless text. Emily's rehearsed little smile. Matthew's vacant nod. And louder than all of it, Martha's voice. You need to protect yourself now. At 2:17 a.m. I gave up trying to rest. My heart thudded in my ears as I reached for my laptop. For years, Emily had handled so many of the accounts. It's just easier, Olivia. You shouldn't have to worry about these complicated things in retirement. She'd say with that syrupy sweet voice. And I wanted to believe she was being helpful. That she cared. But tonight, as my fingers hovered over the login screen, I typed in my credentials with a very different kind of awareness. The dashboard loaded. At first glance everything looked normal. And that was the danger. It looked normal because I'd never questioned it before. Slowly, methodically, I dug into the history. Checking. Savings. Retirement. Investments. Most of the transactions were familiar. Utilities, groceries, the usual. But the further I scrolled, the colder my blood ran. Dozens of small transfers. Small enough to slip under the radar. Labeled with vague categories like home expenses, property maintenance, emergency repairs. But I hadn't approved any repairs. And the recipient accounts? Registered under a secondary user. Not me. I clicked deeper. Emily's name. My stomach dropped. She had linked her card to my accounts, quietly, subtly, for months. Maybe longer. Skimming. Bleeding. A little at a time. This wasn't about the cruise. This wasn't about feelings. This was theft. And Matthew, was he truly blind? Or had he just decided as long as the money kept flowing, he didn't care? A wave of heat rose in me. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. Sharper. I closed the laptop slowly. In the dim kitchen light, the family photos on the wall no longer looked like memories. They looked like evidence of an elaborate con I'd willingly stepped into. They never loved me. They loved what I could give. My throat burned. But no tears came. Instead, I whispered to the empty room. You gambled with my kindness, Emily. You gambled with my trust. I had always told myself. Staying quiet didn't mean I was weak. But now I finally understood. Silence could be sharp too. They underestimated me. But I would not be the fool again. By morning I was no longer panicking. The fog had lifted. All that remained was focus. Cold, clear focus. I called my financial advisor under the calm guise of a routine check-in. I didn't want to raise alarms. Not yet. Not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Of course, Mrs. Gardner. Mr. Whitaker answered cheerfully. He had managed my portfolio for years. What can I assist you with today? He asked pleasantly. Kept my tone even. My son and daughter-in-law have been helping me with some household expenses, I said. But I'd like to make sure everything is still structured as we originally planned. He began pulling up my files. I kept breathing, steady and slow, even though my hands trembled beneath the desk. Well, everything appears generally stable, he murmured. Though I do see some recent activity. His voice shifted, subtle but noticeable. It seems several fund transfers have been scheduled. mostly for ongoing home renovations. I swallowed hard. Renovations? Yes. Rather significant ones, actually. A few large sums earmarked for, quote, design upgrades and contractor prepayments. I gripped the phone tighter. And who authorized these transfers? There was a brief pause. Well, Mrs. Gardner, technically you did. Or rather, your authorized representative account did. My stomach lurched. Which representative? Another pause. It appears that your secondary authorized user, Mrs. Emily Gardner, processed these transactions. She has full access under the durable power of attorney you signed last spring. I closed my eyes. I remembered that day. Emily had brought over a notary, all smiles and sweet reassurances. Just to make things easier in case of emergencies, Olivia. Of course she had. Of course. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker, I said calmly. Would you mind flagging all future transactions for my personal review before processing? I've decided to be more hands-on going forward. He agreed immediately. When I hung up the call, the silence in the room wasn't the same anymore. There was no doubt now. Emily wasn't helping. She was positioning herself for when she and Matthew could quietly bleed me dry, using that house as the perfect excuse as their cover story. My retirement wasn't supposed to be their inheritance. Not yet. But they were already spending like it was. I glanced at the old silver locket resting on the windowsill, the one my husband gave me on our 30th anniversary. He would have seen this sooner. He always warned me, be generous but don't be blind. But I had wanted so badly to believe in family. I had made myself so small to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to keep being mom. But love without respect, that's not love. That's a prison. And I had just found the key. Across the room, the shelf that used to hold a framed photo from Matthew and Emily's housewarming was now empty. I had taken it down 2 nights ago. Funny thing was, the shelf looked better without it. Lighter. And for the first time, so did I. They had gambled on my silence. They would regret that. That afternoon I walked to the park. I needed air. I needed space that wasn't built by my sacrifices. A space not filled with furniture I bought for them, or haunted by pictures of people who saw me only as a resource. The old oak tree still stood where my husband used to sit every Sunday, newspaper in hand. I would feed the ducks. He'd call it our little corner of calm. I sat beneath its wide branches. The warm breeze passed over me, lifting a weight from my chest that had been pressing there for far too long. I said nothing, just breathed, just listened. And then I whispered, soft and broken, as if he were still beside me. You would have seen it, Richard. You would have warned me. My fingers brushed over the engraved date on the locket. The day we paid off our first home. The day we told ourselves, we're building something for our family. Back then Matthew was just a boy, bright, eager to build tree houses, not schemes. I bit down on my lip to stop it from trembling. I didn't want to cry. Not anymore. Those tears had already been spent. The next morning I was already waiting outside my attorney's office before they even unlocked the door. Mr. Dalton had handled my affairs for years. Estate planning, trusts, my will. And today, we would be rewriting everything. The initial house purchase for Matthew and Emily. The paperwork Emily once insisted I sign. Just to make managing the household finances easier, she said. Back then I trusted her. I trusted all of them. Never again. Mr. Dalton greeted me with his usual warm smile, but I saw the concern behind his eyes. Olivia, I didn't expect to see you this early. Is everything all right? I sat down across from him, folding my hands neatly in my lap. My voice was steady, but there was no softness in it. I need to reverse the house gift. He blinked, caught slightly off guard. You mean, the property you transferred to Matthew and Emily's names? I nodded. Exactly that. I want it undone. I want my assets locked down, all financial powers revoked, and every paper trail documented. He hesitated for just a moment. Not because he disagreed, but because he understood what it meant. Olivia, this may cause some tension. They've already caused tension, I replied. I was just too blind to see it. He studied me, then nodded. Very well. We'll proceed. And one more thing, I added, voice dropping even lower. I want full documentation of any financial activity they've initiated using my accounts. All of it. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every authorization Emily processed. For the first time, a trace of approval crossed his face. We'll need evidence, if this ever escalates. I looked him in the eyes. It's going to escalate. Let's not pretend otherwise. He scribbled notes, then paused. You may also want to consider hiring a private investigator. I raised an eyebrow. You think it's that serious? Dalton's voice softened but remained firm. Emily isn't just manipulating. She's positioning herself for long-term control. Olivia, you have significant assets. If she's already accessing accounts, she may be building a paper trail, something to justify future legal claims. We need a countertrail. Something undeniable. The thought made my stomach twist. But not with fear. With clarity. With readiness. Do it, I said. Hire whoever you trust. He nodded. We'll handle the legal side. The investigator can handle the rest. And just like that, the wheels began to turn. By the time I left his office, I felt lighter. Not because the problem was solved. Far from it. But because for the first time, I wasn't playing defense. I wasn't bracing for the next betrayal. I was moving. As I sat in my car, I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. They wanted quiet. They would get it. But it would be my kind of quiet. The kind that moves in silence. And strikes with precision. The next morning, something slid under my door. I saw it the moment I walked into the kitchen. A plain white envelope. The kind Emily always used for her helpful documents. On top of it, a sticky note. Her handwriting painfully familiar. Just sign whenever you're ready, Mom. It'll make everything easier while we're away. I froze. So, they were already gone. Off on their cruise. Floating somewhere across sapphire waters, sipping cocktails, laughing. And back here, their little game continued. With careful fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a neat stack of documents. Professionally typed. Clean. At first glance, they looked harmless. Routine. Updates. Just a little streamlining, a little clarification. Emily was always skilled at disguising control as convenience. But as I read further, the pit in my stomach widened. Buried in the fine print, hidden beneath generic legalese about estate simplification and authority consolidation, was a permanent, irrevocable power of attorney. One that would give Emily complete control over my finances, my property, my medical decisions, my entire life. My breath hitched. They weren't planning to wait. This wasn't some long con. They were ready to take everything. No. I stood there, gripping the pages. Hands trembling, not from fear, but from the cold realization of how far they were willing to go. Emily didn't want to wait for my passing. She wanted power while I was still alive. She wanted to erase me, politely, weakly, without ever getting her hands dirty. And Matthew, was he really that blind? Or did he know and choose to look away? So long as the money flowed? Either way, it didn't matter. Because the truth had become unavoidable. They weren't family anymore. They were predators. Wearing the faces of people I once loved. I gently placed the unsigned documents back into the envelope, folded it closed, and laid it back on the kitchen counter like it was nothing. Let them think I hadn't noticed. Let them believe I was still that same naive woman. The one who trusted without question. The one who signed whatever was placed in front of her. The one who smiled and said, "Thank you." But that woman. The one who trusted blindly, who signed without reading, who stayed quiet to keep the peace. She no longer lived here. The private investigator would arrive later today. Dalton, my attorney, had already begun freezing every joint authorization. And now, with these documents in hand, I had something new. Proof. Written intent. Evidence they could never talk their way out of. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window, warming my face. They still thought this was their game. That I was fumbling in the dark. But they forgot something. Quiet doesn't mean weak. The moment I slid the unsigned documents back into their envelope, something shifted inside me. It was strange how calm I felt. I wasn't shaken. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was focused. And I was very, very clear. They thought they could move while they were away. That I'd sit here helpless, confused, overwhelmed by legal jargon. That I would feel honored to be included in my own erasure. But they had underestimated me. By noon, I was back in Dalton's office. This time he didn't greet me with concern. He simply nodded, already sensing the urgency on my face. They tried to slip me this, while they're out of town. I slid the envelope across his desk. He unfolded the pages carefully. His brow tightened as he read. They're getting bold, he said finally. This isn't just unethical. It's predatory. He looked up. If you'd signed this, Olivia, they would have had the legal right to sell your home, drain your accounts, even place you in a care facility of their choosing. He waited for panic. Expected me to crumble. Instead I met his gaze. Then let's move faster. He paused, then smiled, a flicker of respect in his eyes. We already have most of the documents prepared. The house reversal is being filed. Account freezes are in motion. And the investigator has begun a full financial audit. He tapped the papers with 2 fingers. But after seeing this, we'll escalate. Aggressively. I leaned in. Lock down everything. Not another dollar moves unless I sign it. No one touches a cent. He nodded. We're also drafting a protective clause for your estate. If they try to manipulate or challenge you legally, we'll have a full timeline of their actions to fight it. I sat back, breathing slower. My hands were still. My shoulders relaxed. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't reacting. I was building. A wall they wouldn't see until they slammed into it. When I returned home that afternoon, the house felt different. Not because it had changed, but as I had. I moved through each room with new eyes. These walls no longer held warmth or shared memories. They were monuments to my generosity and their entitlement. I paused in front of that empty shelf again, the one where the housewarming photo used to sit. That happy little lie. I opened the drawer and took it out one last time. Their smiling faces stared back at me. I whispered to the frame, "You thought I was here to serve you." My thumb hovered over Matthew's face. "You thought I'd never say no." Then I turned the photo around face down and slid it deeper into the drawer. Let it sit in the dark. Just like the truth I'd ignored for too long. 2 days later my phone rang. I recognized the number immediately. My private investigator. I answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Gardner," he said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the weight beneath it. "You may want to sit down for this." I closed the curtains before I spoke, out of instinct. "Tell me." He didn't waste time. "Your daughter-in-law recently listed the property as collateral for a second mortgage. She's already in the pre-approval process with a private lender. The paperwork was filed last week." I stood perfectly still. They were already borrowing against the house I had fully gifted them. Without hesitation. Without a string attached. Now they were leveraging it. Like it was theirs. Like it had always been theirs. "Did they disclose how they obtained ownership?" I asked. "They described it as a simple family transfer," he replied flatly. "No mention of power of attorney. No mention of your accounts. Nothing about the manipulation. In fact, the lender seemed impressed. Their exact words were, 'generous family backing.'" I bit down on the inside of my cheek to stop the shaking. They weren't just taking my money anymore. They were gambling with it. Building debt on top of my kindness. Making risky moves I never agreed to. And if I hadn't started this process when I did, I might have come home to find the house sold, my accounts emptied, and legally they'd walk away untouched. "Do they have any idea you're aware of this?" I asked. "No, ma'am. As far as they know, you're still sitting quietly at home." I let out a slow breath. "Good. Let's keep it that way." We hung up. I sat in the dim light of my living room for a while. The soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. This was no longer just betrayal. This was theft. In progress. And yet, oddly, I felt no panic. No rage. Only a cold, sharp sense of direction. They weren't careful because they never thought I'd question them. They still saw me as the mother who'd do anything to keep the peace. But they hadn't realized something simple. When a woman like me finally says, no, it's already too late for the other side. I stood, smoothed the front of my blouse, and looked out the window, at the house I had bought for them, and in that quiet moment I smiled. "You gambled with my gift, Emily. Now I'll gamble with your future." That night I didn't turn on the lights. I sat by the window in silence, watching street lamps stretch long shadows across the sidewalk. The world outside moved gently, unaware of the storm unfolding quietly inside these walls. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared. I wasn't confused. I was calculating. They thought I would crumble under the weight of their betrayal. They thought their carefully rehearsed, "We're just helping you, Mom" routines had left me powerless. But the truth was simple. They had built their house of cards on my trust. No. I had stopped holding my breath. A neighbor pulled into their driveway. Their headlights swept briefly across my living room. The beam flickered over the empty spot on the mantel, where the family photo used to sit. The shelf looked better now. Cleaner. Honest. I whispered into the quiet. They gambled with my gift. Now I'm gambling with their future. And it felt good to say it out loud. I had spent years swallowing discomfort, convincing myself that love meant tolerance, that being needed was the same as being valued. But needing someone isn't the same as loving them. They didn't love me. They loved my money, my usefulness, my willingness to say yes, without reading the paperwork. But the moment they no longer needed me, the mother, the woman, they tossed me aside. With a smile. No. They were so far out on that limb. I didn't have to push. I just had to stop holding it steady. I closed my eyes and pictured Emily's face. That polite, practiced concern. That syrup-sweet voice she used whenever she wanted something. "You're like a second mother to me, Olivia." Lies. No one tries to erase their own mother. No one buries a permanent power of attorney beneath meaningless forms, unless they've been planning it for a long time. I opened my eyes, sat back in my chair, feeling my spine straighten. They had counted on my silence, but my silence had become my weapon. I stared out the window a little longer, the night air cool against the glass. And after everything they'd done, I didn't feel broken. I felt powerful. The next few days moved like clockwork. No emotion, no hesitation, just one deliberate step after another. Every morning I sat in Dalton's office, flanked by him on one side, and the private investigator on the other. We worked like surgeons, quiet, efficient, clinical. Every transaction, dissected. Every withdrawal, traced. Every account Emily had touched, documented, with meticulous care. As the files piled up, my stomach should have churned. But it didn't, because the deeper we dug, the clearer it all became. Emily hadn't just linked her personal card to my accounts. She had used my retirement fund to pay off her personal credit card debt. She had funneled money into private investment accounts under her maiden name. She had even used my name to secure pre-approval for a second mortgage on the house I gifted them, all while smiling across the dinner table, all while calling me Mom. Dalton slid another printed statement across the table. "This pattern of deception," he said, "will speak volumes in court, if it comes to that." The investigator added, "The timing lines up too neatly. The power of attorney documents slipped under your door. They were trying to make you legally powerless, before you even realized what they were doing." I nodded, letting the facts settle like dust on shoulders that no longer carried the weight. "It's greed," I said softly, dressed up as concern. "They didn't want me gone. They just wanted control." Dalton met my eyes. "And they would have had it, Olivia. Completely. Most people sign those documents without ever reading the fine print." I looked back at him, taken. "But I didn't sign." "No," I said. My voice was flat. "Thought." Dalton nodded. "No, you didn't. And now, Olivia, they've left a trail long enough to hang themselves with." We worked late that night. When I finally stepped out, the sky was dark again. But I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel afraid. I felt something stronger. When I got home, I walked through the house with new eyes. The drapes Emily had chosen. The overpriced light fixtures I paid for. The marble countertops she insisted we upgrade. The soft close cabinets she had to have because they made the house feel more sophisticated. It was all mine again. Every inch of it. They had gambled everything on the assumption that I would stay quiet, that I was too old, too soft, too desperate to cling to any scraps of affection. But they forgot who built this house. I ran my fingers along the cool surface of the kitchen counter and whispered, "You tried to erase me while I was still breathing. Now I'm erasing you, while you're still pretending to smile." Tomorrow was the day. The reversal paperwork would be filed. The asset freezes activated. The protections locked in. And by the time their cruise ship pulled back into port, the world they thought they owned would already be gone. And they wouldn't even know it. Not until they tried to step back into it. The final document sat in front of me. Everything was here. The house reversal. The asset protections. The complete revocation of Emily's financial access. Every loophole they'd carved for themselves. Closed. Every inch of ground they thought they stood on. Gone. All without a single argument. Without a single raised voice. No confrontation. Just consequences. Dalton stood quietly at the far end of the conference table. The notary adjusted her pen. Waiting. All that was left was my signature. My hand hovered for just a moment. Not from doubt. That had vanished long ago. But from the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just paperwork. This was a declaration. Years of sacrifice. Of blind love. Of quiet suffering. All being rewritten in thick black ink. The notary glanced up politely, silent, expectant. My hand didn't tremble. Not this time. I signed. One page. Then another. And another. With each signature I felt lighter. Freer. When I signed the last document, Dalton gathered the pages with deliberate care. His voice was steady, but carried quiet satisfaction. It's done, Olivia. Full reversal executed. The house is legally yours again. Every financial authorization they held is voided. They can't touch anything now. Not your accounts. Not your property. Not even your utilities. I nodded. Come. And if they try to contest it? Dalton's eyes sharpened. Then they exposed themselves. We have every shred of evidence. The investigators' full report. The unauthorized transactions. The coercive power of attorney they slipped under your door. While conveniently vacationing at sea. I exhaled slowly. The fear was gone. The waiting was over. For the first time in years. My future belonged entirely to me again. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I paused on the courthouse steps. Their cruise ship would dock in 4 days. 4 days. Before they returned to a world they believed they still controlled. They had no idea. The locks had changed. They had no idea. The house they had tried to leverage for debt was already sold. Quietly, legally, irrevocably. The sale had finalized just hours before I signed the reversal. A clean buyer. Full cash offer. Expedited closing. The money. Already in a new account. One they couldn't touch. One they didn't even know existed. I smiled. As the wind picked up. Cool and quiet against my face. They thought I was helpless. They thought my silence meant surrender. But silence can be powerful. The morning they returned, I was already there. I parked a block away. Stood quietly across the street. And watched. Their car pulled into the neighborhood. Sunlight bouncing off the hood. Their luggage stacked in the back. They were glowing from their cruise. Tan relaxed. Completely unaware. Emily stepped out first. Sunglasses perched high on her head. Already barking orders at Matthew. As he unloaded their bags. We need to call the bank, she said. I want the second mortgage paperwork finalized by Friday. Matthew barely responded. His eyes glued to his phone. Detached but obedient. Then they both froze. 2 unfamiliar cars were parked in their driveway. Moving vans. A young couple stood near the front door, chatting happily with the realtor. I crossed the street slowly. Each step measured, unhurried. Matthew was the first to spot me. Mom. His voice cracked, somewhere between confusion and something else. Something creeping into his eyes. Fear. Emily's eyes narrowed. What's going on? Who are these people? The young couple standing near the porch smiled politely and walked inside with the realtor. The front door closed gently behind them. Their door now. I finally spoke. You won't need to worry about managing anything for me anymore. Emily's face flushed. What the hell does that mean? Matthew's voice rose, panicked. Mom, what's happening? Why are there people in our house? I let the silence hang. Let the panic bloom. Not your house, I said, calm and even. Not anymore. Emily stepped forward, shrill and defensive, the voice she always used when control started slipping. You can't do this. We're in the middle of refinancing. We have contracts. I cut her off. I reached into my bag. and pulled out a thick folder. Here are the only contracts that matter. I handed it to Matthew. His hands trembled as he opened it. He flipped through the documents. The house reversal. The finalized sale. The investigator's report. The proof of Emily's unauthorized transactions. Copies of every transfer, every forged signature. His face drained of color. Emily snatched the folder from him, eyes frantic, skimming the contents. Her breath quickened. She was calculating, searching for a loophole, anything to spin, anything to twist. None of this will hold up, she snapped. We were managing things for your benefit. You'll regret this when you calm down. We were just trying to help. I kept my voice steady. Help? You mean draining my accounts behind my back? Gambling with debt tied to a house you didn't even own anymore? Forging power of attorney and hoping I'd quietly sign it while you were halfway across the ocean? Emily's jaw tightened. Matthew finally found his voice. Mom, we didn't mean. I raised my hand. Stop. The word was quiet but final. You didn't mean to get caught. And for the first time, I saw it in their faces. Not love. Not remorse. Fear. The kind of fear that only shows up when the person you underestimated has been watching, waiting, moving in silence. I let the silence stretch. Then for the first time in months, I smiled. A real one. You gambled with my trust, I said. And you lost. Emily's face twisted. Not with guilt, but with rage. She looked like a cornered animal, still ready to strike, but finally realizing the trap had already snapped shut. You can't just take everything from us, she shouted. We built this life. You don't get to destroy it over a few misunderstandings. Matthew's breathing grew shallow. He clutched the folder like it might vanish if he held it tight enough. I stayed still, measured. You didn't build this life, I said softly. You took it, piece by piece, smile by smile. And you thought I'd let you. Emily's voice cracked with desperation. We have rights. We're family. You can't just cut us off like this. I felt the weight of the years behind me. All the times I swallowed my voice. The humiliations I endured to keep the peace. The guilt. The giving. The blind belief. But not today. I reached into my bag again and pulled out a second folder. Thinner than the first, but heavier. I held it up between us. If you want to pursue legal action, I said calmly, this is what you'll be facing. Emily grabbed it like a rabid dog. Inside. The full investigator's report. Every unauthorized withdrawal. Every forged document. Every attempt to steal from me. The power of attorney she slipped beneath my door, while smiling into my face. Fraud. Elder financial abuse. Coercion. Forgery. Emily flipped through the pages faster and faster. Her breathing sharpened. Her skin lost its color. I spoke again. Softer now, but with more weight. If you even think about taking me to court, Emily, this file becomes public record. Every transaction. Every falsified signature. Every dollar you tried to take from your own mother-in-law. I let the words settle like a stone. Matthew whispered, barely audible. Emily, what did you do? She snapped her head toward him. Don't you dare put this on me, Matthew. You were fine with it when the money was flowing. But Matthew just stood there, eyes wide, shoulders slumped, watching everything fall apart. The marriage that once seemed so united in quiet cruelty was cracking, fast. I watched them both, took a deep breath, and said what needed to be said. I was your mother, Matthew. You made me your target. His lip quivered. His head lowered. For a brief second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who asked me to fix his toy truck, the one who ran to me with scraped knees. But that boy was long gone, and I was done mourning him. This isn't revenge, I said. It's protection. For the first time in years, I'm finally protecting myself. Emily threw the folder to the ground, glaring at me with the venom of someone who had lost everything. You think you've won, she spat. You'll end up alone. I smiled again. Come, steady. Alone, I said softly, is better than being used. Then I turned my back and walked away. I never once looked back. I drove home slowly. The engine hummed beneath me, steady and quiet. As I turned through winding streets, sunlight slipped between the trees, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Quiet streets. I could feel every breath steady itself as I drove through the fading gold of dusk. By the time I pulled into my modest apartment building, the sun had already dipped low behind the rooftops. Not grand, not flashy, but mine. Fully mine. I closed the door behind me, turned the lock, and for a moment I imagined the scene still unfolding back at that house. My house. Now someone else's home. The movers. The smiling young couple. Unpacking into the life Matthew and Emily once believed was untouchable. And them. Standing on the driveway. Surrounded by the wreckage of their plans. Their house. Gone. Their schemes. Exposed. Their illusions. Shattered. The phone buzzed once on the counter. A message. From Matthew. Mom, please. Can we talk? This isn't what I wanted. Please. I stared at the words. Told me. He hadn't called me Mom in person for months. But now, stripped of everything, he suddenly remembered who I was. I didn't reply. A second message came a minute later. I'm sorry. Emily got carried away. He pushed me. You know how she is. I never wanted to hurt you. I could almost hear the tone in his voice. Desperate. Reaching. Scrambling to rewrite history. Now that there was nothing left to take. My thumb hovered over the screen. But I didn't type anything back. Because I had finally learned the truth. You only miss me. Now that I said no, I placed the phone face down on the table. And walked toward the window. Outside, the evening breeze carried the sound of children playing down the block. Simple, honest laughter. Behind me the apartment was quiet. Safe. Empty, in the best way. No manipulation. No agendas. No lies. Just peace. They thought I couldn't live without them. But the truth was, I had been suffocating beneath them for years. Every sacrifice I made for Matthew, every dollar, every moment, every hope, they turned into weapons, and used them against me. But here I was now, stripped of everything I once clung to, and I had never felt lighter. Let them rage. Let them scramble. Let them blame. I had nothing left to give them, and that made me the freest woman alive. I whispered into the quiet, like a prayer meant only for me. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Finally, I believed.